your dreams.
Hey, what's up guys, welcome back to another Genshin Impact video, and today I'm just going to be talking about who to pull for in Genshin 4.5 between Chiori, Itto, Neuvillitte, Kazuha, and Eula and Albedo. I'm just going to be pointing out the pros and cons of these characters, and you yourself can decide, who to pull for in Genshin 4.5. By the way, if you happen to like the content, feel free to leave a like and subscribe. So the first character I'm going to be talking about is Chiori first, since she's the new girl in town. Chiori is basically an off-field Geo character. If you want to play around with Geo constructs, you basically pull for Chiori, because the dolls that she summons on her elemental skill will basically deal more Geo damage if there are Geo constructs in the area. So Chiori is going to work pretty well with characters that can summon Geo constructs, whether it's the Geo Traveler's Geo Balls, Zhongli's Geo Cock, Albedo's Express Elevator, or Goro's Flags, I think, Ningguang's Geo Screen. Basically, Chiori will work with any of those characters. Basically, whenever Chiori uses her elemental skill, her Geo dolls will be summoned, and basically those Geo dolls will do a coordinated Geo attack whenever your characters do a normal attack on the enemy. Damage dealt this way is considered elemental skill damage, kind of similar to Raiden's elemental skill, but with Geo instead. I also forgot to mention that the Geo constructs will also add an additional doll. So at C0, Chiori can only have a max of 2 dolls on the field. Chiori also does have some on-field capabilities. If you do a normal attack after her elemental skill, she will basically infuse herself with Geo for 5 seconds. So you don't necessarily have to play her off field if you don't want to. If you want to play her on field as well, you can do just that. I'm gonna just go over Chiori's lower constellations briefly. Chiori C1 lets her play outside of Geo constructs. So if you want to play Chiori outside of Geo constructs, you basically kind of have to pull for that C1. Because at C1, Chiori will summon an additional doll if there's a Geo party instead. So instead of relying on a Geo construct to summon additional dolls, you can just pull for C1 and just have a Geo character in the party. So if you have a Geo character that does not have access to Geo constructs like Navia, Yujin, this C1 will basically help you work with them a little bit more effectively. At C2, whenever Chiori uses her burst, which costs 50 by the way, for 10 seconds after using this burst, a doll will appear on your active character for every 3 seconds. This doll named Kinu will basically, deal Geo damage to the enemies. So at C2, you basically gain an additional doll whenever Chiori uses her burst. More dolls equals, well, more damage. Overall, if you have a mono Geo team that consists of a lot of Geo constructs, Chiori will work pretty well in that team. If you want Chiori to work well outside of mono Geo, you kind of do have to pull for that C1, so that way you can have Chiori, 1 additional Geo character, and 2 other member slots. I might as well talk about Albedo real quick, since Albedo and Chiori are pretty similar, and Albedo is getting a rate up in Genshin 4.5 in the new event Wish banner. I might as well talk about this new banner briefly real quick. I'll basically go over how it works. So this new banner basically does take up the intertwined fates, which is basically the paid gems, the paid fates, and before you begin wishing on this banner, you are forced to choose which 5-star character you want. Whether it's going to be Albedo, Eula, I think Jean, Mona, and Klee are also in this as well. You can also choose the 5-star weapons that are going to be in the banner. If you choose a 5-star character, you're basically going to be getting characters, but if you choose the 5-star weapon, you're basically going to be getting weapons instead. You get a guaranteed 5-star at 90 pulls, and yes, there is a 50-50 still, so you still have to win the 50-50. However, if you do lose the 50-50, you get 1 Uno fate point, and once you get that 1 fate point, basically the next time you get the pity, you basically get the guaranteed character that you selected. So let's say you pick Jean because she's hot, but you lost the 50-50 to Klee. Because you have that 1 fate point, the next guaranteed that you get will be Jean for sure. However, you got to keep in mind that the fate point system does not carry over. So if you did lose the 50-50 to Klee and you didn't get Jean, you basically, the next banner that comes around, you basically lose that 1 fate point. However, your pity counter is still there. You basically just lose the fate point though. So let's say that you did lose the 50-50 to Klee when you wanted Jean, and you do 20 more pulls, you're still 20 pulls in. However, when the next banner comes around, you lose that 1 fate point, but you're still going to be 20 pulls in. So that basically means that you have to win another 50-50 again. And that's basically the gist of it. All right, so now back to Albedo. Now Albedo, he's basically like the male version of Chiori, the OG Chiori. They are both pretty similar, but I do think Chiori is slightly better, mostly because Chiori can at least have some on-field capabilities, since she can infuse herself with Geo at least. Albedo's passives are kind of bad. His only good passive was the one that basically his elemental skill will deal 25% more damage when the enemy is below 50%. But he has another passive that basically boosts your party's elemental mastery, which is pretty useless on Geo since they don't really need EM. Not to mention his constellations are just straight up bad. His C1, he gets more energy. Okay, that's, that's whatever. C2, his elemental skill, will deal a little bit more damage. I guess that's kind of good. At least Chiori's C1 can at least let her, work outside of like Geo constructs and shit. I've heard that his Geo construct flower can get trampled by bosses pretty often. And if it gets destroyed, it's basically no longer there and you basically have to re-summon it. Since he does summon Geo constructs, he technically can work with Chiori. It's not like you have to replace Albedo with Chiori or vice versa. They can work pretty well together. His best weapon is a free-to-play weapon, but a lot of people would have missed out on it. His elemental skill, he summons a Geo flower that also works as an elevator. It scales off of defense. It can be off-field. His elemental burst does not scale off of defense, and that's why I think Chiori's better, because at least Chiori's burst does scale off of her defense. But as I stated earlier, you can work both of them together since Albedo has a Geo construct. I feel like Albedo's just kind of there. He's just like an option that you can use, right? I mean, if you want a Geo off-fielder, there's Albedo. That's all I can really say about Albedo. That's all I have to say. He's just Albedo. He's just there. Next character I'm going to talk about is Neuvillitte. Now, Neuvillitte is a pretty good main DPS character. I've been hearing a lot of good things about Neuvillitte. I wonder if his rerun is going to make more than his previous banner. I think Neuvillitte might be one of the best DPS characters in the game, and that's mostly because, he's basically just an Unga Boonga element, or Unga Boonga character. You basically spam his Hydro Cannon and, enemies are dead, right? That's basically all he does. He has a Hydro Cannon, he basically kills enemies. Just like with any other main DPS character, you do build him with crit rate, crit damage. I've seen people solo Abyss with him, whether he's at C0 or at C6. This man can basically, solo the Abyss if you want him to. I've seen people turn off their DPI and basically they, spam his Hydro Cannon and spin around the Abyss room and they basically clear the Abyss. His best set is going to be the MH set. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's basically the set that requires you to lose HP. Since Neuvillitte does lose his own HP, however, he does get it all back. That's one of the reasons why he's pretty good at soloing, since he can basically heal himself. One of his passives requires him to do at least 3 different hydro elemental reactions, because if he does all 3, he basically gets a stack that boosts his hydro cannon, which is his elemental skill. I don't think it matters what team comp he's in, because he's basically just gonna stomp everything. He works well with Furina, since Furina buffs everyone. He made Dea relevant, since Dea can basically help him mitigate some damage and also prevents him from getting staggered. He will work well with any character that does, off-field damage, whether it be Fischl, Xianyun, Chiori even, Yai, Miko, Raiden A, Nahida. He is one of the best DPS characters in the game. However, he's not needed to clear the content, but he will make things pretty easy. So if you want a broken DPS, you pull for Neuvillitte. Neuvillitte will be on the second phase though, so you are going to have to wait a bit before you pull him. Now as for the first phase, there's going to be Itto as a Geo main DPS running alongside with Chiori. Itto basically only works in mono Geo. He can't really work that well outside of mono Geo. Zhongli basically carries mono Geo, right? I think his pillars basically reduce the enemy's Geo resistance, or basically like elemental resistance. Itto does scale off of defense, and we got Goro, who's another Geo character, who's basically like the Geo Bennett. He basically raises Itto's defense. The last Geo slot can literally be who the fuck ever, as long as they're Geo. We got Albedo, we got Ningguang, we got Chiori, who's new. When it comes to team comps, Itto is, he's kind of limited, right? He's basically just glued to mono Geo. With Neuvillitte, you could basically put any other sub DPS with Neuvillitte and, it'll just work. But Itto is just, he's just stuck with mono Geo. I can only really suggest that you pull Itto if you just really like Mono Geo. People have problems with Mono Geo because it's just basically orange physical, and the crystallized reaction isn't really that good, so Mono Geo does kind of have to rely a little bit more harder on the raw stats of your artifacts, since the elemental reaction of Geo is, well, not that good. So if you like Mono Geo, you pull Itto. That's it. Kazuha is going to be running along the second phase with Neuvillitte. Kazuha is basically a NMO buffer. He buffs the elemental damage of your party members. As a support character that buffs your party, he is going to be pretty easy to build. You just stack EM on the man, and you know, that's basically about it. Slap on the Viridescent Venerer set on him, since that set's 4-piece can basically decrease the enemy's elemental resistance depending on what element you swirl. And that's basically about it. There might be some people that say that, you know, he kind of got outshined by Furina, since, you know, Furina is very good at buffing your party members. But I do think Kazuha has some uses, since he's Animo. He's pretty good against Abyss Mages, Abyss Heralds, since he can basically, you know, swirl elements onto their shields and, you know, break their shields a little bit more quickly. So I do think Kazuha is still pretty good and, you know, very worthy of pulling for. If you don't have another decent support on your account, I do think Kazuha will be worth pulling for. And with the whole Sucrose versus Kazuha argument, I do think Kazuha is easier to use than Sucrose. Although Sucrose is pretty good in certain situations in which, you know, if your party needs more elemental mastery, I do think Sucrose will be better for that, since he does increase your party's EM. Kazuha can do it as well, however, he does require the Constellation 2 to do that. So yeah, if you need a good support, then pull Kazuha. Is there anybody else that I'm missing? Oh yeah, I think Eula's getting... Yeah, Eula's coming back too. Eula is a pretty good example of power creep happening in Genshin, because when she was first released, a lot of people praised her for her damage and thighs. But nowadays, people only just praise her for her thighs. Her damage is kind of minuscule compared to the characters that we have today. And that's mostly because we don't really have a dedicated physical support. There are also a lot of Ruin Guard enemies in the Abyss, and they have a lot of physical resistance. Since physical is kind of doo-doo at the moment, I think Eula's best team as of right now is basically some random Hyperbloom team. You can at least plunge Eula now thanks to Cloud Retainer, right? Cloud Retainer can basically make anybody plunge and also boosts their plunge damage. We also got Furina, who's a pretty good buffer. I mean, like I said, I can only recommend pulling for Eula if you just really like Eula. But until we get like a dedicated support for physical, whether it's a 4-star physical Bennett or a 5-star physical support character, Eula is not going to be dishing out as much damage as the current DPS characters that we have now. So TLDR, Chiori is an off-field Geo that works with Geo constructs. Albedo kind of just exists in Mono Geo. Neuvillitte's the best main DPS in the game. Kazuha is a very good animal support character that boosts your party's elemental damage. And we got Eula, who has really good thighs. You know, I kind of just realized I forgot about Klee. Now, Klee is a pyro main DPS character that is pretty clunky to use. Catalyst characters in general tend to be pretty clunky to use. Klee is kind of selfish. She kind of has to be on the field. However, she does have a constellation at C4 that lets her use her burst off field. Just like with Eula, I can only recommend you pull for Klee unless you just really like Klee. You can at least play Klee and Virgin. You can also plunge with Klee as well with Cloud Retainer. So that's basically about it. Let me know what you guys think. Are you guys going to be pulling for anybody in 4.5, or are you going to be saving for a certain somebody that might be coming in the future? Let me know in the comments, and I'll see you guys later.
Bye bye now. Come again soon.